In this video, I will talk about modernism in English literature with special reference to poetry basically and with occasional inputs from fiction, not so much about drama. Now, we first have to understand the term modern. When we use it in the context of English literature or generally European literature or art forms or art history, the meaning of the word modern is different from what we mean by it in our day to day use in India and even in other parts of the world. So it's almost like romanticism. Just as we mean by romanticism something akin to a love affair in our day to day life, but the technical meaning of romanticism is very different and much more wide, though not exclusive of this love affair. Similarly, in our day to day life, by modern we mean something akin to contemporary or latest. That is not the meaning of modern in English literature actually. So, though that was the origin, that kind of meaning was the origin of the term modern in English literature. In English literature and in European literature and other art forms, modern is of particular period level, and also it implies some kind of a philosophy. That period is generally dated from, say, the beginning of the 20th century to the mid 20th century, so 1900 to 1950, we can say. Some would like to put it between the two world wars, slightly flexible, but then more or less it is the 20th century, first half of the 20th century. Now, nothing happens in a day, unlike atomic blasts. That also you have to prepare the atoms. So, modernism, the kind of spirit that infused our modern thoughts, had been going on. So far as English studies are concerned, one prominent thing is reaction to Victorianism. And at the same time, we can say that this is also carrying out to the extreme certain elements which were raised during the Victorian times itself. We can take two examples. One is the Dover Beach of Matthew Arnold. Many cite it as actually the first modern poem before the beginning of modernism. Similarly, Hardy, though Hardy is a Victorian novelist, a late Victorian, in him we can say that Victorianism transcends itself and he becomes a kind of proto-modernist novel. So such links are there, or Hopkins even. Anyway, so what are the characteristics of modern poetry or modern writing in general? There are many, but we can take note of a few only. First thing we would like to say here is that modernity or modernism, these two are again different generally. Modernity is a condition of being modern, but modernism is the philosophical movement or artistic movement. And then again, let me say there are various kinds of modernisms. In art, for example, both expressionism and cubism, they form part of the modern movement, but the aesthetics and philosophy of these two are quite different. Anyway, the first sign of modernism in poetry is that it consciously attempts a radical break with the past. Now, how do you bring that break with the past? Two things, as usual, is important: theme and technique. So, a typically good modern poet is innovative both technically and thematically. It likes to initiate a break from the past, which led one famous poet to distinguish a poem which is modern both thematically and technically as modernist, and a poem which is modern only in one aspect as modern only. Anyway, So that is not generally subscribed to by all, but then by following that logic, we can identify say T.S. Eliot as a typical modernist poet, because he not only experiments with various new themes like total loss of faith, disruption, dislocation everywhere, but also technical virtuosity. For example, going back to or going as far as quoting Sanskrit literature, Buddhist texts, which were not known earlier. If they quoted at all, those are in Greek Latin tradition, from the Greek Latin tradition. I will expand it further anyway. So if you look at Eliot, representative poems of Eliot like The Wasteland, there is innovation both at the level of themes and techniques. That is one. Innovation which has to be different from the Victorian theme. This leads to the second point, which is a kind of, we can say, internationalism in modern poetry. No modern poet, the typical modern poets, are ready to be limited by their own home. You can relate it to my video on Said's exile. So Eliot wrote about Buddhism, Upanishads, Datta, Dadham, Damyata, this Shanti, 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 all these things. And even W. Yeats wrote on characters like Anasua and Priyambada, Upanishadic characters. He was well read in the Bhagavad Gita, we can say, introduced by Purohit Swami. And then Ezra Pound, this is the trio of modernism. Okay, as we say, Laka, Foucault, Derrida, the trio of theory or post-structuralism or theory in general, or Said, Bhabha and Spivak, the trio of post-colonialism. So Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot and W.B. Yeats are known to be the trio or the trinity of modern poetry in English, or modernist poetry in English. Better to call modern. So anyway, so Ezra Pound even went to Far East, to China and Japan. They translated Li Po's poetry, The River Merchant's Wife, a letter. It has been translated in Bangla by Rabindranath Tagore, in Assamese I think by Hem Borua. So this is another feature of modernism, going beyond the local ones. Third point is its obfuscation. Here we may keep yet slightly out of the box. That is, modern poetry is very complex. Eliot professed it. In his essay on metaphysical poet, he said that our age demands great variety. So we have to force, if necessary, dislocate language into meaning. You cannot readily understand what is modern poetry, though now there are pay limitations. So let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table. Even if you leave aside the imagery of this patient etherized upon a table, which is a sign of a modern poem, a modern imagery, no flower, sun, etc., but a patient under anesthesia on a table. But you and I, who is this I? Is this the beloved? No, possibly not. We cannot say no also, but possibly not. Possibly it is the poet's alter ego. Or it could be any friend. Very difficult to give meaning. So, the same with the wasteland. So many references, so many things are coming. Yeats is also complex in a very subtle way. With Eliot, the thing is, I would say, this is my observation, with Eliot we know that we do not understand him, and hence we do not understand. Yeats is more subtle. When we read Yeats, due to the apparent simplicity of language, we think that we have understood him, but we haven't. If we read more, then more complexities will emerge in Yeats also. Even as poem as simple as Among School Children, if you read and reread, or Eastern 1916, what is he doing there? Just challenge the entire kind of revolutionary ideals which has been held sacred by Marxists and other groups. Too long a sacrifice can make a stone of the heart. So Why he is Yeats, while he is celebrating the revolution, at the same time he is pointing at the inhuman side of revolution. So it's a great critique, but very implicit. Okay, these so we have covered till now, radical break with past, then internationalism, and the third point is difficulty or obfuscation. Here we must also take note, just as I said, nothing happens fully new. There was at least one important immediate precursor, Browning, in the Victorian age. Browning's poems were also, often some of his poems were infamous for this. Now, a fourth important point, this will apply to novels also, plays also. Two very significant influences behind all modern movements in literature and other art forms are Marx and Freud. Freud you will find more readily, because if you read Eliot's Wasteland, for example, My Nerves Are Bad Tonight, Neurosis, it again refers to his wife. Ironically, though Eliot is supposed to speak about impersonality in poetry, if you read him deeply, he is one of the most personal poets. This is again my theory. I can establish that. Not right now, there is no time. Okay, so theory and praxis often may not go together. So, Eliot, Neurosis is coming more readily in Lawrence. All his novels are in a way a kind of essays on Freud, we can say, elaborate footnotes on Freud. I am not trying to diminish his kind of artistic talent. He is great, but Freud was a major influence. We have had a poor man's Freud in India, not poor man's, very rich man's, but poor in terms of maybe understanding. So Osho, basically what he tried to give is package Freud with the in some spiritual mumbo jumbo language. Freud was a hardcore atheist, by the way. He said that only thing that can take you along in life is courage. So Sigmund Freud is very important, in fact more important than Marx in the initial decades of modern poetry. Later Marx's influence became much more visible in the next generation of poets like Spender and others. So, and then another important point I'd like to add here, city. This is directly in opposition with the protocols of romantic poetry. Just as romanticism was a return to the country from the city, romantics do the opposite. Preludes you read, and most other poems going back to the city. Fragmentation, alienation, or we can say even defragmentation today, these are all parts of city life where people are alienated from their moorings. So you reread this, the simple, prototypical, though not simple, modern poem, that is Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. You will find how city is emerging as a personality itself, not only as a metaphor, which smothers different kinds of existences and then emerges as a persona. Now, city, you have to remember, modern poetry is essentially a poetry of the city. Here again, Yeats is an exception. To every generalization, there will be exceptions. For example, Shakespeare is still yet arguably the best English writer, though he knew allegedly small Latin and less Greek. Though we are now saying that he knew a lot more than Ben Jonson thought, but definitely did not know as much as Bacon did. Similarly, Tagore won the Nobel Prize without being a matriculate. He did not study beyond class 6. But these are exceptions. We cannot take exceptions to prove the rule. Exceptions are always exceptions. So, Yeats is a general exception. He in fact say that we were the last romantics, chose for theme and traditional sanctity. So these are some of the very important features of modern poetry in general, and then I also have referred to this, and then I would have insisted, but now there is no time. If I make a video longer than 15 minutes, awfully difficult to upload it Even 15 minutes would be difficult. Please, highlight on that alienation aspect with which I ended as a part of city life. Alienated human soul, alienated from the community. Here both Marx and Freud becomes important. In fact, become important. In fact, Marx becomes more important than Freud. That alienation and how we address it, and how art gives representation to it. Modernist art, poetry, literature, novel, art, all in general, paintings. So these are some of the things. I think now you are clear about what modern means in English literature and European literature studies and some of its essential characteristics. Then thank you so much.